What would you do if you discovered that someone close to your family, someone you were supposed to trust, was hiding a dangerous secret? For 10-year-old Noah, it was a question he never thought he'd have to answer. But on the day of his father's wedding to Sophia, a seemingly perfect woman, Noah knew he couldn't stay silent. In front of a room full of guests, Noah revealed something so shocking, it brought the entire wedding to a halt. His brave decision uncovered a hidden truth that left everyone stunned, and had his father calling 911 before the ceremony could continue. But what exactly did Noah know about Sophia? And how did a young boy piece together a plan that even adults couldn't see coming? Stay tuned, because this is a story of courage, betrayal, and the unshakable bond between a father and son that you won't want to miss. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if stories of bravery and family loyalty inspire you, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment like this. Now, let's get into it. The morning sun poured through the windows of the small chapel, illuminating the intricate, stained glass that painted rainbows across the pews. It was supposed to be a perfect day, the happiest day of Ryan's life. The room buzzed with quiet excitement as guests adjusted their outfits and whispered about the soon-to-arrive bride. At the altar stood Ryan, beaming in his tailored black suit. His hazel eyes sparkled with a happiness that hadn't been there in years, not since losing his wife, Noah's mother, 2 years ago. This was supposed to be a fresh start for him and his son, a chance at rebuilding the family they had lost. But not everyone in that room shared Ryan's excitement. 10-year-old Noah stood just a few feet away, clutching a small velvet pillow that held 2 gold rings. His dark brown hair was neatly combed, and his tiny suit matched his father's. On the outside, he looked every bit the proud ring-bearer, but on the inside, Noah was a storm of emotions. His stomach churned with unease as he glanced at his father, who seemed oblivious to the cloud hanging over their family. Noah's eyes darted nervously to the chapel doors, dreading the moment Sophia would walk through them. Sophia, the woman everyone else in the room adored. The woman who had swept Ryan off his feet with her dazzling smile and kind words. But Noah knew better. He had seen a side of her no one else had, and today he had to do something that no 10-year-old should ever have to do. He had to protect his father. The trouble had started months earlier on an ordinary weekday afternoon. Ryan had picked Noah up from school, his face glowing with excitement. "Noah, buddy, I've got someone I want you to meet," Ryan had said, practically bouncing as he navigated their way home. "Who?" Noah had asked, his curiosity piqued but tinged with caution. It had just been the two of them for so long. Could he handle someone new stepping into their lives? "She's special," Ryan had said, his grin widening. "Her name's Sophia, and I think you're going to like her." When they pulled into the driveway, Sophia was waiting for them on the porch. Her wavy blonde hair caught the late afternoon sunlight, and her blue eyes sparkled as she waved. She looked perfect, almost too perfect. "Noah!" she had exclaimed, kneeling to his level as they approached. "I've heard so much about you. Your dad can't stop talking about how smart you are." She had smiled, and for a moment, Noah thought she might actually be nice. Maybe having someone like her around wouldn't be so bad. Maybe it would make his dad happy again. And for a while, it seemed like it might. In the weeks that followed, Sophia made every effort to win Noah over. She brought him little gifts, his favorite candy, a new set of markers for his drawings, and asked him about school, showing genuine interest in his favorite subjects. She laughed at his jokes and even helped him with a tricky science project one night when Ryan was stuck working late. Noah wanted to like her. He really did. And yet, something didn't feel right. There were moments, small and fleeting, where her mask seemed to slip. A flash of irritation if he interrupted her while she was on her phone. A tight-lipped smile when his dad wasn't looking. But nothing that Noah could prove, not yet. Over time, though, the cracks in Sophia's facade became harder to ignore. She began making little comments, subtle but stinging. When Noah showed her a drawing he was proud of, she'd smile and say, "That's nice, but don't you think it's a bit messy?" If he spilled a drink, her cheerful tone would sharpen just slightly. "Oh, Noah, you're so clumsy sometimes." When Ryan was home, Sophia was all sunshine and sweetness, praising Noah for every little thing he did. But when it was just the two of them, her demeanor was cold. She started scolding him for things that weren't even his fault and sending him to his room for the smallest infractions. Noah didn't know how to explain it to his dad without sounding like he was being dramatic. "Dad won't believe me," he thought to himself every time Sophia made another snide remark. But he began to keep track, writing down little things he noticed, overheard, or felt. He didn't know why he was doing it at first. Maybe it was just his way of making sense of everything. Or maybe, deep down, he knew he'd need evidence someday. Now, standing at the altar with the pillow of rings clutched in his hands, Noah's heart pounded. He looked at the chapel doors again, knowing that when they swung open, he'd have to make a choice. Do I stay quiet and let Dad marry her? Or do I speak up and risk everything, he wondered. He thought about the secret folder he'd found on Sophia's laptop. He thought about the late-night phone calls he'd overheard, the way she mentioned Phase 2 and insurance money. None of it made sense at first, but now it did. He couldn't let this wedding happen. Noah shifted nervously as the wedding march began to play, the first note sending a ripple of anticipation through the crowd. His father looked down at him and smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing just feet away. "Here we go," Noah whispered to himself, bracing for what he knew was coming. The chapel doors creaked open, revealing Sophia in all her bridal glory. The crowd rose to their feet, but Noah stayed rooted to the spot, his small hands trembling. He didn't know how, but he was going to stop this wedding, no matter what it took. The doors of the chapel opened with a dramatic creak, and every head turned toward the bride. Sophia stood framed in the doorway, bathed in soft sunlight that streamed through the open arch. Her gown was a vision of elegance, layers of ivory lace cascading down in intricate patterns, sparkling faintly as they caught the light. She held a bouquet of white roses, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair resting lightly on her shoulders, and her blue eyes shimmering with what could easily be mistaken for joy. To the guests, she was the picture of perfection, a dream bride walking toward her happily ever after. Noah watched her from his spot near the altar, his heart pounding. On the surface, she looked every bit the fairy tale princess, but Noah couldn't shake the knot of dread in his stomach. There was something wrong about her, something no one else seemed to see. Her smile, so radiant and full of warmth for the guests, felt hollow to Noah. Her steps were graceful but rehearsed, as if she were walking onto a stage rather than stepping into a new life. And when her gaze briefly flicked to Noah, it wasn't warmth he saw. It was cold, calculating, as if she were assessing him as a problem to be solved. Ryan, standing tall at the altar, had no such doubts. His face lit up as Sophia made her way toward him, his joy uncontainable. It was the same look he'd had the first time he introduced her to Noah. For a brief moment, Noah's mind drifted back to that day, the day everything had changed. It had been a crisp fall afternoon, 2 years after Noah's mother had passed away. Noah remembered every detail, how the leaves crunched underfoot as he and Ryan walked to the car after school, how his father had been uncharacteristically upbeat. "I've got a surprise for you, buddy," Ryan had said, his smile wide and infectious. Noah had tilted his head, curious but hesitant. Surprises weren't something they did much anymore. Life had been quiet and predictable since his mom's death. "What kind of surprise?" Noah had asked cautiously. Ryan had chuckled, clearly eager to share his news. "There's someone special I want you to meet," he'd said, his voice filled with an energy Noah hadn't heard in years. "Her name's Sophia. I think you're going to like her." When they'd arrived home, Sophia had been waiting on the porch, a bright smile plastered across her face. She'd looked like she belonged in one of those lifestyle magazines Noah's mom used to read, with her polished appearance and perfectly coordinated outfit. She'd waved as they approached, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon light. "Noah," she'd called out warmly, her voice carrying just the right mix of excitement and gentleness. "I've heard so much about you." Noah had felt his father's hand on his shoulder, giving him a gentle squeeze of encouragement. "This is Sophia," Ryan had said, his voice brimming with pride. "She's very important to me, and I hope she'll be important to you too." Sophia had knelt down to Noah's level, her blue eyes locking onto his. "Your dad talks about you all the time," she'd said, her smile widening. "He says you're the smartest, kindest kid he's ever known. I'm so excited to finally meet you." Her warmth had been disarming, and Noah had found himself smiling back despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad, he'd thought. Maybe having Sophia around would make things better for both of them. And for a while, it had seemed like that might be true. In those early weeks, Sophia had gone out of her way to make Noah feel included. She'd help him with his homework, ask him about his favorite subjects, and even bring him small gifts, a new sketch pad for his drawings, his favorite snacks. Ryan had seemed happier than Noah had seen him in a long time, humming as he cooked dinner or breaking into laughter at the smallest joke. The house had started to feel alive again, and Noah had wanted to believe it could stay that way. But it hadn't been long before the cracks in Sophia's facade began to show. At first, it was little things. A tight smile when Noah spilled his drink at dinner. A subtle eye roll when he interrupted her while she was on her phone. When Ryan was around, Sophia was all charm and patience, laughing at Noah's jokes and praising his good grades. But when it was just the two of them, her demeanor shifted. The warmth disappeared, replaced by a sharpness that Noah couldn't quite put into words. One evening, Ryan had been working late, and Sophia had been left in charge of dinner. Noah, eager to make conversation, had asked her about her favorite books. "Do you like adventure stories?" he'd asked, his voice hopeful. Sophia, barely looking up from her phone, had sighed. "I'm busy, Noah," she'd said curtly. "Just eat your food." Her tone had stung, but Noah hadn't said anything. He'd poked at his plate in silence, the air between them heavy and uncomfortable. Later that night, when Ryan had come home, Sophia's warmth had returned, as if someone had flipped a switch. She'd laughed at Ryan's jokes, ruffled Noah's hair, and acted as though nothing had happened. Noah had tried to tell himself it was nothing, that he was overreacting. But as the weeks went on, Sophia's behavior became harder to ignore. When Ryan wasn't around, her comments grew sharper, her patience thinner. "You're such a handful sometimes," she'd mutter when Noah left his toys out in the living room. "I don't know how your dad puts up with it." Noah had started to dread the times when Ryan wasn't home. He'd retreat to his room, doing his best to stay out of Sophia's way. But even there, he couldn't escape the feeling that she was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. And yet, every time he thought about telling his dad, he'd stop himself. Ryan seemed so happy, so hopeful about their future with Sophia. How could Noah ruin that? Now, standing in the chapel, Noah's chest tightened as Sophia walked toward the altar. She looked serene, her every movement calculated to perfection. The guests were captivated, smiling and whispering as she passed, but Noah could only focus on the icy knot of dread in his stomach. As Sophia reached the altar, she turned to Noah and flashed him a bright smile. To everyone else, it would have looked warm and genuine. But Noah saw something else. A glint of warning in her eyes. A silent message meant just for him. Don't you dare ruin this. Ryan, oblivious to the tension, took Sophia's hand and whispered something that made her laugh softly. Noah's hands tightened around the ring pillow as he struggled to calm the storm inside him. He glanced at his father, whose joy was palpable, and then back at Sophia, whose smile was as hollow as ever. For a moment, Noah considered staying quiet, letting the wedding happen. But then he thought about everything he'd seen, everything he knew. He couldn't let it go on. Not when his dad's happiness, his safety, might be at stake. The officiant's voice broke through Noah's thoughts, calling the congregation to attention. The ceremony was beginning, and Noah knew he was running out of time. As the first words of the vows were spoken, he glanced at Sophia again. Her smile hadn't faltered, but Noah could see the cracks beneath it. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was about saving his dad, and Noah knew he'd have to act soon, before it was too late. The ceremony continued, the officiant's words a low hum in the background as Noah stood by the altar, lost in his thoughts. He glanced again at Sophia, standing next to his father with an expression of pure devotion on her face. To anyone else, she seemed the perfect bride, graceful, loving, and kind. But Noah knew better. He had seen too much, endured too much, to believe the facade she wore so convincingly. The first time, Noah had noticed something was off about Sophia. It had seemed like a small thing, easy to dismiss. She'd been in the kitchen, sipping coffee while scrolling through her phone, and Noah had bounded in to show her a picture he'd drawn. It was a colorful, chaotic depiction of a rocket ship blasting into space, something he was proud of. "Look, Sophia," he'd said eagerly, holding it up for her to see. "It's a rocket ship. We're learning about space in school." Sophia had glanced up briefly, her expression neutral. "That's nice, Noah," she'd said, her tone flat. "But don't you think it's a bit messy?" Then she turned back to her phone, leaving Noah standing there with his drawing clutched in his hands, feeling deflated. It wasn't a big deal, he'd told himself at the time. Maybe she'd just been distracted. But it had happened again and again. Little comments that chipped away at his confidence, making him feel small and unimportant. When his father was around, though, Sophia was a completely different person. She'd laugh at Noah's jokes, ask him about his day, and ruffle his hair affectionately, all while casting glances at Ryan to make sure he was watching. Noah began to feel like he was living in two different worlds. One, where Sophia was the caring, doting woman his father adored, and another where she was cold, impatient, and sometimes even cruel. The shift between the two was so seamless, so calculated, that it left Noah doubting his own perceptions. Was he imagining it? Was he overreacting? He wanted to talk to his father, to tell him about the things Sophia said and did when they were alone. But every time he tried to bring it up, something stopped him. His father seemed so happy, so content with Sophia in their lives. How could Noah ruin that? And what if his dad didn't believe him? The fear of being dismissed, or worse, of being accused of making things up, kept Noah silent. But Sophia's true nature became harder to ignore as time went on. One evening, about a month before the wedding, Noah accidentally spilled a glass of juice on the living room carpet. He froze. staring at the spreading stain in horror. Sophia, who had been working on her laptop nearby, looked up sharply. "What did you do?" she snapped, her voice cold. I'm sorry," Noah stammered, scrambling to grab some napkins. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, Sophia was on her feet, her face a mask of fury. She grabbed Noah's arm, her fingers digging into his skin as she pulled him away from the mess. "Look at this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You're so clumsy. Do you have any idea how hard it's going to be to clean this up?" Noah winced, tears springing to his eyes as her grip tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Sophia leaned in close, her eyes narrowing. "You'd better," she said, her tone dripping with malice. "And if you even think about telling your dad about this, you'll regret it. Do you understand me?" Noah nodded frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. When Sophia finally let go, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands shaking the entire time. That night, he sat on the stairs, rubbing his sore arm and listening as Sophia greeted his father with a cheerful, "How was your day, honey?" It was like nothing had happened. From that moment on, Noah began to feel a constant knot of fear in his stomach whenever he was around Sophia. Her smile, her laughter, even her kind words all felt like weapons, carefully aimed to keep him quiet and compliant. He tried to avoid her as much as possible, retreating to his room or spending time outside whenever she was home. But the more he tried to stay out of her way, the more isolated he felt. The worst part was watching his father fall deeper under Sophia's spell. Ryan was happier than Noah had seen him in years, his grief over losing Noah's mother seemingly replaced by the hope of building a new life with Sophia. "Isn't she wonderful?" Ryan would often say, his eyes shining. "We're so lucky to have her, buddy." Noah would nod and force a smile, the words catching in his throat. Lucky. That's what his father thought they were. But Noah knew the truth. He could see it in the way Sophia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she thought no one was looking. He could hear it in the sharpness of her voice when she spoke to him. And he could feel it in the bruises on his arm, the reminders of what happened when he stepped out of line. Then, one night, everything changed. Noah had been lying in bed, unable to sleep, when he heard a low voice drifting up from downstairs. Curious, he crept out of his room and down the hall, careful to avoid the creaky third step. Sophia was in the living room, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. "I told you, Jake, everything's going according to plan," she was saying, her voice sharp and impatient. "The wedding's in 2 weeks. After that, we move to phase 2. Noah crouched low, his heart racing as he listened. Phase 2? What was she talking about? "No, Ryan doesn't suspect a thing," Sophia continued, her tone softening slightly. "He's completely oblivious. Once the insurance money comes through, we'll be set for life." Insurance money. The words sent a chill down Noah's spine. He didn't understand all of it, but he knew enough to realize something was very, very wrong. "What about the kid?" the voice on the other end of the line asked, faint but clear enough for Noah to hear. Sophia let out an annoyed sigh. "Noah's a problem, but I can handle him. He's just a kid. Ryan won't believe a word he says." Tears pricked at Noah's eyes as he listened to her cold, dismissive words. His heart pounded so loudly he was afraid Sophia would hear it. He backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound, and retreated to his room. That night, Noah lay awake, replaying Sophia's words over and over in his mind. Insurance money. Phase 2. Jake. He didn't know exactly what she was planning, but he knew one thing for certain. His father was in danger, and if he didn't do something soon, it might be too late. Noah couldn't shake the words he had overheard. Insurance money. Phase 2. Jake. They played on a loop in his head, filling him with dread and a sense of urgency he'd never felt before. Sophia wasn't just mean, she was dangerous. She was planning something that involved his father, and he was the only one who could stop her. Over the next few days, Noah kept a close eye on Sophia, watching her every move and listening carefully whenever she spoke. She was careful, always wearing her mask of charm and warmth around Ryan, but there were moments when her guard slipped. Noah began to notice patterns. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to be meeting the wedding planner or running errands, but she never came back with anything that looked like wedding preparations. When she was home, she was constantly on her phone, typing furiously and smiling in a way that made Noah's skin crawl. One afternoon, when Sophia left the house claiming to have a dress fitting, Noah decided to search for clues. His heart raced as he crept into her room, the one she had been sharing with Ryan since she moved in. He felt a pang of guilt as he opened her drawers and rifled through her belongings, but the memory of her late-night phone call kept him going. At first, he found nothing, just clothes, makeup, and other ordinary items. But then, tucked into the back of a drawer, he found a folder. Inside were several documents, including a life insurance policy in Ryan's name. Noah's hands trembled as he read the details. The policy had been updated recently, just a few months after Sophia had entered their lives. It listed Sophia as the primary beneficiary and promised a payout of several $1 million in the event of Ryan's accidental death. Noah's stomach churned. It was real. This wasn't just paranoia or a misunderstanding. Sophia was planning to hurt his dad. He wanted to stop searching, to run to Ryan and tell him everything. But something made him keep going. He needed more. He needed proof that Ryan couldn't ignore. As he continued searching, Noah's eyes landed on Sophia's sleek silver laptop, sitting on the bedside table. It was closed, but not locked away. Swallowing hard, he reached for it and opened the lid. The screen lit up, and to his surprise, it wasn't password protected. Sophia must not have expected anyone to snoop. Noah clicked through her files, his heart pounding with every folder he opened. Most of it was mundane, pictures, documents related to the wedding. But then he found a folder labeled Phase 2. Inside were files with names that made his blood run cold. Ryan's schedule, accident plans, and insurance payout breakdown. He clicked on one file, a document outlining a plan to stage an accident during the honeymoon. It was all there in black and white, written out in cold, meticulous detail. And then there were the photos. At first, Noah thought they were pictures of the wedding preparations, flowers, venues, things like that. But then he saw him, a man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow, smiling with Sophia in several photos. They weren't just standing together, they were holding hands, laughing, looking at each other in a way that made Noah's stomach twist. Jake. It had to be him. The man Sophia had been talking to on the phone. He wasn't just a co-conspirator, he was something more. Noah didn't understand all the details, but he knew enough. Sophia and Jake were working together to scam his dad, and once they got the insurance money, they were planning to run off together. Noah quickly closed the laptop and put everything back where he'd found it, his hands shaking. He ran to his room and sat on his bed, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? If he told his dad, would he even believe him? Sophia was so good at pretending, so good at making everything look normal. And if Ryan didn't believe him, Sophia would know he'd told. What would she do to him then? For days, Noah wrestled with his fear and uncertainty. He tried to drop hints to Ryan, small comments about Sophia's behavior or how she acted differently when he wasn't around. But Ryan would just laugh and brush it off. "Come on, buddy," he'd say, Sophia loves you. She's just under a lot of stress with the wedding coming up. It's a big change for all of us." Noah wanted to scream. Why couldn't his dad see it? Why couldn't he tell that something was wrong? But he didn't scream. He just nodded and pretended everything was fine, even as the weight of the secret he was carrying threatened to crush him. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed to sense that something was off. She started watching Noah more closely, her smiles sharper, her words more pointed. One evening, as they were clearing the dinner table, she leaned down and whispered in his ear, her voice low and menacing. "I know what you're up to," she said. "If you think you're going to ruin this for me, you're wrong. Keep your mouth shut, or you'll regret it." Noah froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to yell at her, to call her out right there in front of his dad, but he couldn't. He was too scared. Instead, he nodded, keeping his eyes down, and hurried to his room as soon as he could. That night, as he lay in bed, Noah stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. He couldn't let Sophia win. But if his dad wouldn't believe him, what could he do? The answer came to him in a moment of clarity. He didn't need his dad to believe him right away. He just needed to stop the wedding. If he could do that, everything else would fall into place. The documents, the photos, the phone calls. He had enough evidence to prove the truth. But first, he had to make sure the wedding didn't happen. Noah sat up, his resolve hardening. He didn't know how he was going to do it yet, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let Sophia get away with her plan. He had to protect his dad, no matter what it took. And with the wedding just days away, he didn't have any time to waste. As the first rays of morning light crept through his window, Noah took a deep breath. He was scared, but he was also determined. This wasn't just about stopping Sophia. It was about saving his family, and he was ready to do whatever it took to make that happen. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a blur to Noah. His mind raced constantly, filled with a whirlwind of fear, doubt, and determination. He couldn't afford to waste a single moment. Sophia's plan was nearing its final stage, and Noah knew he had to act quickly. If he didn't, his dad might not survive to see what lay beyond the honeymoon. Noah spent every spare moment gathering evidence. Whenever Sophia left the house or became distracted with wedding errands, he would sneak into her room or borrow her laptop. He found emails between her and Jake, coded in vague terms but clearly discussing the insurance policy and plans for the future. After the trip, one email read, "We'll never have to worry about money again." Another chilling message from Jake stated, "Make sure the paperwork is in place. We can't afford loose ends." Noah began writing everything down in a small notebook he hid beneath his mattress. He noted every cruel comment Sophia made, every suspicious phone call, and every document he found. He listed the times she'd left bruises on his arm and the threats she'd whispered in his ear. He even drew sketches of the man he'd seen in the photos with her, detailing the scar above his eyebrow and the smug grin he wore in every image. But the closer the wedding came, the more dangerous things became. Sophia seemed to sense that Noah was up to something. Her eyes lingered on him longer, her smiles tighter, her words sharper. She watched him like a hawk, and the slightest mistake on Noah's part would bring her wrath down upon him. One evening, as Noah sat at the dining table working on his homework, he felt Sophia's gaze boring into him from across the room. She stood by the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone with one hand while stirring a pot of soup with the other. "You've been quiet lately," she said suddenly, her tone light but laced with an edge that made Noah's skin crawl. "Is there something you'd like to share with me?" Noah froze, gripping his pencil tightly. "No," he said. keeping his voice as steady as he could. "Just busy with school." Sophia walked over to the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She leaned down, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I've noticed you've been distracted. I hope you're not worrying your dad with silly ideas. He has enough on his plate with the wedding coming up." Noah's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't dare look at her, afraid his face would betray him. "I'm not," he mumbled, keeping his eyes fixed on his notebook. Sophia's grip on his shoulder tightened just slightly, enough to make him wince. "Good," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "because if you ruin this for me, I'll make sure you regret it, understand?" Noah nodded quickly, and Sophia straightened up, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. "Now, finish your homework. Dinner's almost ready." That night, as Noah lay in bed, the weight of what he had to do pressed down on him like never before. Sophia wasn't just a liar, she was dangerous. But he couldn't let her win. He wouldn't. He clutched his notebook tightly, his resolve hardening. He had a plan, and no matter how scared he was, he would see it through. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The house was a flurry of activity as guests began arriving. Caterers set up tables, and flowers were delivered by the dozen. Noah watched from the corner of the living room as Ryan floated through the chaos, his face glowing with happiness. "You ready for the big day, buddy?" Ryan asked, ruffling Noah's hair as he passed by. "It's going to be perfect." Noah forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, Dad, perfect." But inside he felt like a ticking time bomb. Every second that passed brought them closer to the ceremony, closer to the moment when Sophia would solidify her hold on Ryan's life. Noah clutched the small notebook in his hands, now wrapped in a piece of brown paper to disguise its contents. He had written everything down, every piece of evidence he could find, and he planned to reveal it during the ceremony. It was the only way he could be sure people would listen. The guests began to gather at the chapel, their excited chatter filling the air. Noah, dressed in his tiny suit, stood near the altar clutching the velvet ring pillow. His stomach churned as he watched Ryan greet the guests, shaking hands and laughing. Everyone was so happy, so oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. And then she arrived. Sophia stepped out of the sleek black car that had brought her to the chapel, her gown shimmering in the sunlight. She smiled brightly at the guests, waving and exchanging pleasantries as if she hadn't a care in the world. But when her eyes met Noah's, the mask slipped for just a moment. Her smile faltered, and her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. It was a silent warning, a reminder of the threat she had made. Noah looked away, his heart pounding. He gripped the ring pillow tighter, his knuckles turning white. He couldn't let her intimidate him now. Not when they were so close. The ceremony began, the officiant welcoming the guests and speaking of love and commitment. Noah barely heard the words, his mind racing as he rehearsed what he was going to say. He glanced at Sophia, standing next to Ryan with a serene expression on her face, and felt a surge of anger. How could she stand there so calmly, knowing what she was planning to do? As the ceremony continued, Noah felt like the walls were closing in around him. He could barely breathe, his chest tightening with every passing moment. The officiant's voice droned on, the words blending into a meaningless hum. And then it happened. The moment he had been waiting for. "If anyone here has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," the officiant said, his voice ringing out clearly, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Noah's heart leaped into his throat. This was it. This was his chance. He looked at Sophia, whose serene expression had faltered slightly, her eyes darting to him nervously. He glanced at his father, who was looking at him with a smile, completely unaware of the bombshell that was about to drop. Noah took a deep breath, his hands shaking. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room on him, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. He had to speak. His voice trembled as he opened his mouth, his words cutting through the tense silence. "Wait!" A collective gasp rippled through the chapel. All eyes turned to Noah, who stood trembling, the small brown package clutched tightly in his hands. "Stop the wedding," he said, his voice louder now, firmer. "You can't marry her." The room froze. The sound of Noah's voice cut through the ceremony like a knife, and for a moment no one moved. Every guest turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and shock. At the altar, Ryan stared at his son, his brow furrowed with concern. "Noah?" Ryan said softly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What's going on, buddy?" Noah's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the weight of every gaze on him. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand tall. He had to do this. He had no choice. "You can't marry her, Dad," Noah said, his voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "She's not who you think she is." Gasps rippled through the chapel, and a murmur of whispers spread among the guests. Sophia's face remained calm, but her eyes flashed with something cold and dangerous as she turned to look at Noah. "Noah," she said, her voice sweet but with an icy undertone. "I know this is a big day, and it might feel a little overwhelming, but this isn't the way to handle it. Let's talk about this later, okay?" "No," Noah blurted, taking a step forward. His hands gripped the small package he had prepared. "You're lying, Sophia. I know what you're planning. I know about the insurance money and Jake." The whispers grew louder. Ryan's face went pale and he turned to Sophia, his confusion deepening. "Insurance money? Jake? What is he talking about?" Sophia let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "Ryan, he's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's saying." She turned back to the guests, her voice rising in an attempt to control the narrative. "I'm so sorry about this, everyone. Noah's been having a hard time adjusting to the idea of me becoming part of the family. He's acting out because he's scared." "I'm not scared," Noah shouted, his voice cracking. "You're lying. You've been lying to Dad this whole time. You and Jake are planning to hurt him after the wedding so you can take his money." The murmurs turned into a low roar as the guests began to piece together what Noah was saying. Some looked horrified, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Ryan raised a hand to quiet the crowd, his eyes fixed on Sophia. "Is this true?" Ryan asked, his voice low and steady. "Sophia, what's he talking about?" Sophia's composure faltered for just a moment before she forced a smile. "Of course it's not true, Ryan. You know me. You know how much I love you. Noah's just confused. He probably overheard something and misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand," Noah said, his voice resolute. He held up the package in his hands. "I have proof." Sophia's smile froze, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. "Proof?" Ryan echoed, his voice heavy with disbelief. Noah unwrapped the package, revealing his notebook. He opened it to the pages where he had written down everything. Every comment, every overheard conversation, every piece of evidence he had found. He stepped forward and handed it to his dad, his hands trembling but steady enough to hold the book out. "Here, Dad," Noah said. "Look, read it. I wrote down everything she's done, everything I found. She's been lying to you." Ryan hesitated for a moment before taking the notebook. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the notes and sketches. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to horror. He turned to Sophia, his voice shaking. "Is this true?" he asked again, louder this time. "Sophia, is any of this true?" Sophia's mask cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the horrified faces of the guests, the stern expression of the officiant, and the tears welling in Ryan's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since Noah had met her, she seemed completely at a loss. "You're going to believe this?" Sophia finally said, her voice rising in desperation. "You're going to believe the wild accusations of a 10-year-old over me? Ryan, I've been here for you, for both of you. I've done everything I could to make this family work, and now you're throwing it all away because of a tantrum?" Ryan's face hardened. "A tantrum? This isn't just a tantrum, Sophia. He has details, things he couldn't have made up. Insurance policies? A man named Jake? Pictures? Explain it." Sophia's eyes darted around again, searching for an escape, a way to regain control. Her voice turned cold, and she crossed her arms. "You know what? Fine. Believe what you want. But if you think I'm going to stand here and let this little brat ruin my life, you're wrong." A collective gasp rippled through the chapel. The mask was gone. Sophia's face twisted with anger as she turned on Noah. "You've been a problem from the start," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Always meddling, always in the way. Do you think you've won? Do you think your dad's going to love you more for this?" "That's enough," Ryan shouted, stepping between Sophia and Noah. His voice was firm, his anger barely restrained. "Don't you dare speak to my son that way." Sophia froze, her anger replaced by fear as she realized just how far she had pushed. Ryan's hands trembled as he looked at her, the betrayal clear in his eyes. "I trusted you," he said, his voice breaking. "I let you into our home, into our lives, and this is what you've been planning." Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Noah spoke again. "There's more," he said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "I found files on her laptop. Emails, plans, even pictures of her and Jake. They're working together." Ryan stared at the USB drive as if it were a live wire. Slowly, he took it from Noah's hand and turned to Sophia one last time. "Tell me it's not true," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look me in the eye and tell me it's not true." Sophia's silence was deafening. The chapel erupted into chaos. Guests stood from their seats whispering furiously to one another. Some began to leave, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. Others moved closer, craning their necks to see what would happen next. Sophia's face hardened, and she took a step back. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "You're all crazy. I don't have to stand here and listen to this." Before anyone could stop her, she turned on her heel and bolted down the aisle, her wedding gown billowing behind her. "Sophia!" Ryan called after her, but she didn't stop. She shoved past the guests and burst through the chapel doors, disappearing into the sunlight. The room fell silent except for the faint sound of her heels clicking on the pavement outside. Ryan turned to Noah, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have listened to you." Noah stepped forward and hugged his dad tightly, tears streaming down his face. "It's okay, Dad," he said. "You know now, that's what matters." But as they stood there, holding on to each other, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Sophia might have fled, but she wouldn't give up so easily. The battle was far from won. As the chapel doors slammed shut behind Sophia, the room buzzed with disbelief and whispers. Guests exchanged shocked glances, some muttering about the audacity of her escape while others looked at Ryan and Noah with wide eyes. The officiant, visibly shaken, stepped back from the altar, unsure of how to proceed. Noah clung to his father, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. "Dad," Noah said quietly, his voice trembling. "You need to see this." He gestured to the USB drive in Ryan's hand. Ryan nodded, his face pale but resolute. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice firm despite the pain in his eyes. He guided Noah toward a side room away from the growing commotion, his best man, Jack, following close behind. Jack, always the steady presence in Ryan's life, placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "Dave," Jack said, his voice low, "let's take a look. If what Noah's saying is true, we need to act fast." Ryan inserted the USB drive into a laptop Jack had retrieved from his car. The screen flickered to life, and Ryan's expression darkened as file after file confirmed everything Noah had said. There were emails between Sophia and Jake, detailing the steps of their scheme: securing the life insurance policy, planning the staged accident during the honeymoon, and even discussing how to handle Noah if he became too much of a problem. One email stood out. "After the wedding, we'll be set. The payout will come through once the accident's verified and no one will suspect a thing. Just keep Ryan distracted and I'll handle the kid if necessary." Ryan's hands shook as he read the words, his breath catching in his throat. The photos sealed the truth. Images of Sophia and Jake together, laughing and holding hands in places Ryan had never been. One photo taken just a week earlier showed them at a restaurant, a document on the table between them. Ryan zoomed in, and there it was, his life insurance policy, his name clearly visible on the papers. This can't be real," Ryan whispered, his voice breaking. "I trusted her. I thought—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "It's real, Dad," Noah said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, but you have to believe me now." Jack leaned forward, his jaw clenched as he scrolled through the files. "This is solid evidence," he said grimly. "We need to call the cops. Now." Before Ryan could respond, the door to the room burst open, and one of the guests stumbled in. "Ryan!" the man exclaimed, breathless. "Sophia's still outside. She's arguing with someone, a man." Noah's heart raced. "Jake," he said, the name falling from his lips like a curse. Ryan stood, his grief giving way to anger. "Stay here," he told Noah. "Jack, come with me." "No!" Noah protested, grabbing his father's arm. "You don't know what they'll do. Please, don't go out there." Ryan knelt down, placing his hands on Noah's shoulders. "I'll be careful," he promised. "But we can't let them get away with this." With Jack by his side, Ryan stepped out of the room and into the sunlight. Noah followed despite his father's instructions, his heart pounding as he stayed close to the doorframe. Outside, a small crowd had gathered near the parking lot. Sophia stood with her back to the church, her once pristine gown now dirtied from her hurried escape. Facing her was a tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow. Jake. The two of them argued in hushed but heated tones, their gestures frantic. Sophia glanced nervously at the crowd, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the church. She spotted Ryan and Jack approaching, her expression shifting from panic to defiance. "Stay back!" Sophia shouted, her voice shrill. "You have no right to come near me." Jake stepped forward, his stance protective but aggressive. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice rough and menacing. "Leave her alone." "Leave her alone?" Ryan spat, his anger boiling over. "You've been planning to kill me, both of you." Gasps rippled through the onlookers, some of whom had begun filming the confrontation on their phones. Jake's face darkened, and he reached for Sophia's arm. "We're leaving," he said through gritted teeth. Now!" Before they could move, the sound of sirens cut through the tension, growing louder as a pair of police cars pulled into the lot. Officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. One of them, a tall woman with a commanding presence, approached Ryan. "Mr. Matthews?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "That's me. Those two," he pointed at Sophia and Jake, "they've been planning to commit insurance fraud and murder me. We have evidence." Sophia's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "He's lying. This is all some twisted ploy to humiliate me because I didn't want his brat ruining our wedding." Noah flinched at her words, but Ryan stepped forward, shielding his son from Sophia's venom. "Don't you dare speak about my son like that," he said, his voice low and deadly. "You're done, Sophia." The police acted quickly. One officer approached Sophia, gesturing for her to turn around. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning." Sophia glared at Ryan and Noah, her eyes filled with hatred. "You'll regret this," she spat, as the officer cuffed her hands behind her back. Jake, who had been trying to edge away from the scene, was intercepted by another officer. "And where do you think you're going?" the officer asked, grabbing his arm. As both conspirators were escorted to the police cars, Sophia looked over her shoulder, her voice dripping with malice. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll make sure you pay for this." Noah clutched Ryan's arm, his fear giving way to relief as the doors of the police cars slammed shut. The sirens wailed again as the cars pulled out of the lot, carrying Sophia and Jake away. The crowd began to disperse, murmurs of shock and disbelief filling the air. Jack placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his expression solemn. "It's over, Dave," he said. "They're gone." Ryan turned to Noah, his eyes filled with gratitude and guilt. "It's not over," he said quietly, "but it's a start." Noah hugged his dad tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I just wanted to keep you safe," he whispered. Ryan held him close, his voice thick with emotion. "You did, buddy. You saved me." But as they stood there, holding on to each other in the aftermath of the chaos, Noah noticed something, or rather, someone, at the edge of the lot. A man leaning against a car, his face partially hidden by a hat, watching them intently. His posture was casual, but there was something about him that set Noah's nerves on edge. "Dad," Noah said, tugging on Ryan's sleeve, "there's someone over there." Ryan followed Noah's gaze, his expression darkening as he spotted the figure. The man tipped his hat, his lips curling into a small knowing smile before slipping into the car and driving away. "Who was that?" Jack asked, his voice tense. Ryan shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I don't know," he said, "but I think we just got a glimpse of someone we weren't supposed to see." The tension lingered as they turned back toward the church, the weight of the day pressing heavily on them. Sophia and Jake might have been taken into custody, but Noah's gut told him that this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. Sophia and Jake's fate unraveled quickly after their arrest. Within days, investigators dug into their backgrounds, revealing a trail of deception that stretched across multiple states. Sophia, whose real name was Sarah Whitman, and Jake had been running scams for years, targeting wealthy, unsuspecting individuals. The two had perfected their act, with Sophia posing as the perfect partner while Jake operated behind the scenes, coordinating every move. The evidence Noah provided, coupled with their own paper trail of fraudulent schemes, left no doubt about their guilt. Authorities found dozens of life insurance policies linked to Sophia's past relationships, all suspiciously altered shortly before the tragic accidents she and Jake orchestrated. This time, thanks to Noah's courage, their plan had failed. Sophia and Jake faced a long list of charges, from attempted fraud to conspiracy. As they awaited trial, the media caught wind of their story, dubbing it the wedding scam that almost was. Ryan and Noah's names were kept out of the headlines, but their story became a cautionary tale about trust and vigilance. In the quiet aftermath, life began to shift for Ryan and Noah. It wasn't easy at first. The betrayal had left wounds that needed time to heal. But the bond between father and son grew stronger with every passing day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ryan turned to Noah with a look of deep regret. "Noah," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. I should have listened to you from the start. I let myself get blinded by what I wanted to believe, and I didn't see what was right in front of me." Noah glanced up at his dad, his expression thoughtful. "It's okay, Dad," he said after a moment. "You just wanted to be happy, I get it." Ryan leaned over, pulling his son into a tight hug. "You saved me, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us both. I'll never forget that." From that day forward, Ryan and Noah focused on rebuilding their lives. The house, once filled with tension and secrets, became a haven of warmth and laughter. They spent more time together, fishing at the lake, working on school projects, and even tackling a puzzle Noah had been eager to finish for months. The future felt brighter, freer. Without Sophia's shadow looming over them, they could finally breathe again. For Noah, it wasn't just a return to normal. It was a new beginning. He started seeing himself differently, no longer the quiet kid afraid to speak up. He'd stood up for what was right, even when it was terrifying, and that courage stayed with him. One day, as they sat in the kitchen sharing a pizza, stuffed crust of course, Ryan smiled at Noah. "You know," he said, "I think we should take a trip. Just the two of us, somewhere fun. What do you think?" Noah's face lit up. "Can we go to the mountains? I've always wanted to see a bear." Ryan laughed. "The mountains it is, but no getting too close to bears. Deal?" "Deal," Noah said with a grin. As they planned their trip, the sense of peace and togetherness between them was undeniable. They had faced down danger and deception, and they had come out stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they could handle them together. Before we wrap up, let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Noah's shoes? Could you have spoken up the way he did? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story of courage and resilience inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. There are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Stories of bravery, love, and the power of family. Don't miss out on the next one. Click here to find out how a young girl uncovered a shocking truth about her teacher that changed her entire school forever. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.